and I want to welcome you and to our 6th Raytheon Business Ethics Lecture, and thank you for coming. My name is Mike Hoffman. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Business Ethics here at Bentley College. And if you don't know or haven't been to the center, we're in this building on the first floor down at the end. I hope I see some of you who will be inspired by our lecture today to want to come in and see what we do and who we are and use our library and so forth. I also want to let you know now, so that you can anticipate the fact that we have free food right after the lecture in the forum right outside the pavilion. So I hope as many of you can come and partake and also meet our Raytheon lecturer, maybe have a few words with him. If you have some questions, he would be glad to talk to you at that time. So a reception immediately following, starting at 5 o'clock. I also want to thank Raytheon Corporation for sponsoring these lectureships. We've had wonderful success and attendance, and I think really wonderful presentations by some very key business leaders who are the CEOs and or presidents and chairmen of their respective companies, from UPS to IBM to many others. And we have some that will be coming next fall and spring are lined up, and those will be announced to you all shortly. So again, thank you, Raytheon, for being such a good partner in sponsoring these lectures. Raytheon has a first-class, state-of-the-art best practices ethics program in their organization, and that's what makes us proud to be a partner with Raytheon, as we are with Verizon, who sponsors our Verizon Business Ethics and Information Technology lecture. Actually, a week, as you know, in the spring. I also want to announce, and pleased to announce, that through Bentley's partnership with WGBH, this lecture is being filmed, and you will be able to watch it on the web by going to forum, forum.wgbh.org, and you'll find it in the business and economics section. So if you get inspired, which I hope you will, then maybe you can tell a friend that they can see the lecture in that way. It's also being videotaped, and we keep a number of videotapes in the center. So if you would like to take any notes later, or feel like a friend would like to see it, please encourage them to come to the center. It'll take a few days to get those videotapes and the web, the WGBH address on the web, but that will happen very shortly. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Dov Seidman, who is chairman, CEO, and founder of LRN, the Los Angeles-based provider of legal, ethics, and compliance and governance solutions. His passion for creating do-it-right cultures led him to create LRN when he was in his late 20s, quite an entrepreneur. LRN was an early pioneer in the field of online legal, ethics, and compliance education. LRN has grown to nearly 200 professionals at its headquarters and offices in New York City, San Francisco, and London. Dov has galvanized the community of LRN customers around creating best practices, placing values, ethics, and integrity at the center of business. More than 8 million employees at global leaders like Raytheon, 3M, Disney, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Procter Gamble, Viacom, and over 300 members of the Fortune 500 have completed over 10 million LRN courses offered in over 30 languages. I've known Dov for many years and value the passion, ideas, and energy he brings to the field of business ethics. He is an entrepreneur, lawyer, and leader who is first and foremost a philosopher, which I'm proud to say since I got my degree in philosophy, integrating the worlds of philosophy and business. He looks at leadership holistically, from the shop floor to the executive suite, as he works tirelessly. He really is unbelievable in his travels, constantly helping CEOs and organizations focus on building and sustaining ethical cultures. A frequent commentator in the media on ethics issues, his testimony before the U.S. Sentencing Commission greatly influenced the Commission to put in the federal sentencing guidelines that companies move away from the check-the-box, compliance-only approach to focus instead on fostering ethical cultures. These guidelines are the very standards by which companies, cultures, and programs are and will be judged. His academic background gives further weight to his credentials as a leader in business ethics. At UCLA, he was in the Final Four, he earned a simultaneous bachelor's and master's degree in philosophy, summa cum laude, and Phi Beta Kappa, no less. He later received a Bachelor of Arts with honors in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University, and he graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School, where he was an editor of the Harvard Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review. Dov's dedication and focus on innovation assures that LRN will continue its leadership helping shape ethical corporate cultures. Today, he talks with us about the power of how. Interesting title. The subtitle helps reveal what it is about, which is how to achieve enduring success through ethics. Please join me in welcoming Dov Siteman.
Thank you, Mike, for your generous words. I saw a bunch of you signing up, so let me start with a question. Who's here because your professor mandated or required you to come? Show of hands. Who's here because you were incented to come with extra credit? Anybody inspired to listen to a speech about ethics? Anybody in all of the above? All right, those of you in category 1 and 2, I really appreciate you being here. And Mike, again, thank you. But thank you for everybody for being here. You know, as a student, I would think it pretty easy to take for granted how special the Center for Business Ethics is. But when Mike started it 30 years ago, ethics was at the margin. And today, the center is in fact the center of what companies and leaders are talking about day in, day out. In 30 years, through your leadership, Mike, you've moved from the margins to the center, and I admire that. And I'm really proud to be associated with you and for our relationship. So thank you for having me. I'm also honored to be part of the Raytheon lectureship series. I admire Raytheon because Raytheon has a long-standing and demonstrative tradition of investing in a do-it-right culture. And it's done so long before it became fashionable to be principled in business. It starts with CEO Bill Swanson's leadership and tone, Patty Ellis, who's here, Dave LaJoy, Tim Schultz, and Ellen McIntyre. All the Raytheon team reinforces that day in, day out. I can tell you that at Raytheon, integrity, and not quality, but integrity, is job one. No matter how competitive the world is in, Raytheon does its best not to cut corners and put integrity at the center of its business. It inspires me, and I believe it inspires many people who have the privilege to work with and do business with Raytheon. So again, I'm honored to be part and associated with Raytheon. Now, Mike, you asked me to give a speech on business ethics. I bet you some of you told your friends you're coming to this speech because you had to, etc., but you had a little conversation, and you probably got one of two reactions. Business ethics, is that not an oxymoron? Did you hear that? Did anybody say good? It'll probably be a very short speech. So, look, I do have a background in philosophy, but I'm not here to be philosophical about ethics. I do believe, and I want to stipulate, that virtue is, has been, and always will be its own reward. And if all I did is show up here and tell you that the best reason to do the right thing is that it's the right thing to do, this would indeed be a very short speech. But I have more to say. See, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a business leader, and the irony is not lost on me that I make money selling ethics. So how can business ethics be an oxymoron if I make money selling ethics? And I want to provide a perspective from the rough and tumble world of business, the shop floors, the factory floors, boardrooms, and CEOs, about what role and relationship does ethics have with winning and succeeding in life and in business. Now, I said that I make money with ethics, but I sell ethics and make money. I don't sell ethics so as to make money. And that's the critical distinction of today. Doing something and making money is very different from doing something in order to make money. And how we manage that critical distinction and how we navigate the space between and so as, I believe, will have more to do with your success, your ability to not only survive in this world, but to thrive for the long haul. So before I get going and give you this perspective, I see some of you have some tan faces. So let me start with a question. Anybody enjoy spring break a week or two ago? Anybody go out of the country or someplace warm? Someplace warm? Anybody do something slightly or majorly embarrassing? Anybody do something embarrassing but shouldn't have done it, or thinks you did something embarrassing but it should have been thought to be embarrassing? Anybody in that category? Those of you in that category, did anybody take a picture, put it on the web, email it, IM, anybody like that? Well, let me take you back to 2001 and introduce you to Paul Chung. Paul Chung was 24 in 2001. He graduated from Princeton, got a job at the Carlyle Group. He was sent to Korea, the equivalent of a perpetual spring break. And he emailed to his friends using company email. And he essentially bragged about his sexual exploits. I know I was a stud in New York City, but I pretty much get about, on average, 5 to 8 phone numbers a night. It becomes more and more salacious, so I'll stop here. But the point is, this email wound up in thousands of inboxes, including his bosses. So Paul Chung lost his job and his reputation with it. That was 2001. With one click, 2001, fast forward to today, and if you Google Paul Chung and Carlyle, the first 5 entries associated with this individual are exactly what he wrote about, his exploits in Korea. So www is not the World Wide Web, it's the wild, wild web. Because I think that the conditions out there, and many of you have been out there and have come back to school and will be going out again, but the conditions are so different just in the last decade. We are hyper-connected. We are hyper-transparent. Information flies around like water through a sieve, and it's going to have and is having profound impacts on all of our lives. You see, employers now search MySpace before they offer a job, and your colleagues will Google you before they enter a meeting room with you. Now, incidentally, I did a little searching myself, and I found that there are a few Bentley students who have some MySpace pages. One of them wrote that he counts as his heroes, quote, the taxpayers because they pay for the welfare state in our out-of-touch government to exist. So I don't judge, but I do wonder what his employer will think of his or her posting. In this new hyper-connected world that's hyper-transparent, the conditions place a new, I believe, revolutionary emphasis on how you do things, not just on what you do. How you do things will be examined in your life at large and in business in particular. Now, some behaviors, some of your hows will hurt you. But some will help. They will power you and sustain you and give you an advantage for the long haul. I call this the power of how. The power of how. I am not here to give you 7 habits of highly successful ethical people or a 4-step process on ethical decision making, 2 habits, 4 rules of thumb. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to get in touch with a power. It's a way of looking at every situation, how we interact with others, how we think, how we compete, how we win, how we create trust, relationships of mutual advantage, and so on and so on. And I believe that the source of this power does go back to a philosopher. It goes back to Aristotle. See, Aristotle talked about the paradox of hedonism. Interestingly, he pointed out that if you pursue happiness directly, it tends to elude you. But if you live a virtuous life and you passionately do things that are meaningful to you, somehow happiness comes. Well, I believe that there is a corollary to the paradox of hedonism. And the corollary is something I call the paradox of success. I believe that if you pursue success directly, most often it will elude you. But if you pursue significance, if you do things of value that solve real problems in the world or make the world a better place, and you do that with passion and conviction and meaning, then I believe success will come. I believe that as an article of faith, but interestingly, the world is changing in ways that I observe that day in, day out. That's what the statistics are starting to show. Now, I do want to acknowledge that many of you are going to enter the job world or re-enter it. And you're thinking about success in conventional terms. You want a big title. You want a position of influence. You want the trappings of success. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm here to suggest that the best way to attain that type of success is to not pursue it directly. I'm going to extend an invitation to each and every one of you today to pursue success not as a goal, but as a byproduct, as an outcome of achieving and pursuing significance. I admit that it's still the road less traveled. Doing the right thing, pursuing significance first, might feel lonely, it might be inconvenient, it might be unpopular, could feel dangerous, and it might feel unprofitable, at least in the short term. You might continue to see others who are cutting corners and appear to be blazing a trail to the past. But I'm going to talk about how now more than ever the world is changing in ways to allow more people to get to the top by doing the right things the right way. I see that some of these people are winning where they didn't before. Now, why do I believe this? I believe this because the 21st century conditions of capitalism as we find it today are making how we do things matter more than what. And leaders in business today are the ones that are showing us the best example of harnessing this power of how. Recently, I spoke with such a leader. I admire this leader more than any other. This leader has invented new paradigms, new methodologies. He can inspire 80,000 people to work together towards a common goal like no other leader that I've ever seen. His name is Crazy George Henderson. In 1981, October 15th, in the Oakland Coliseum, the A's were playing the Yankees. Can I say Yankees in this room? Okay. Wow. And Crazy George had a vision. I want to create an unbroken wave of human energy to help achieve something, to help my team win. Crazy George invented the wave. And I believe he invented the wave. The first wave ever produced was in 1981. And I believe that the human wave is the greatest act of ethical leadership. The greatest single act of ethical leadership. Think about it. Do you think Crazy George walked up and took out a bunch of $20 bills and looked to his right and says, I'm going to give you 20 if you stand up? That might work with this guy, but he surely did not have enough 20s to go around, right? Do you think Crazy George used fear instead of motivation? Stand up or I'll beat you up. Well, that'll work if he's bigger than the guy next to him, but I think the guy down the stadium is going to feel pretty safe far away, right? So this wave, 80,000 people did not get up and go round and around because of motivation, incentives, mandates, requirements, compliance, or fears. He led the wave. He led the wave because he got his house right. He got his house right. So what did he do? He inspired people. He shared a vision. What if we made the stadium rock with 2 minutes to go and it helped our team win? Let's stand up on the count of 3. I know you've got some popcorn and a hot dog and you don't feel like doing this, but if I get up, will you get up? And then I'll help that person get up. Right? We must agree that there's something about the manner and way, how he communicated, how he shared the vision, how he inspired, how he evinced passion, how he did it with inspiration and not motivation, and with inspiration and not fear that allowed this wave to go and catch fire. Right? Waves are democratic. You don't need to be the CEO in the stand. You don't need to own the stadium. You don't need to be the richest guy in the stand. It's typically 4 guys who've had 1 too many beers and they somehow can get this to happen. Right? But what's the analogy here? And when the wave goes around the 4th time, we forget where it started. Was it section 32 or section 34? That's the power of the wave. So why am I talking to you about a wave? Because everything we do in life and in business is a wave. That email we send can achieve its result. It can create a clear communication and inspire the next action, or it can create confusion. The wave can crash on the shore. A meeting is a wave. There's a productive meeting that achieves its agenda, and there's the opposite. Every report is a wave. When you go out into the work world, everything you say on a phone call, in an email, in a meeting, every presentation and report or PowerPoint that you produce is an opportunity to start a wave. And if you get your house right, that wave can catch on. And others will carry it forward and join in it with you. And I believe that the people who capture and harness this power of how are going to be the people who succeed long term because they have the ability to connect with and inspire investors, dealers, suppliers, competitors, and colleagues and leaders in ways, large and small. So my point here is that starting and sustaining waves in life and in business is all about getting your house right. And by the way, when I say getting your house right, that's what I mean by ethics. That's what I mean by ethics. I mean the ideas, the norms, the perspectives, the habits, the values that have to do with how we treat each other, how we get along, how we communicate, and how we work together. I am not interested in ethics as a noun. Most people think that they're more ethical than their neighbor, their colleague, or certainly their boss. And many of us, when we had bikes as kids, we took the training wheels off and we wanted to ride bikes without the training wheels. And I'm in the education business, and most people do not want training on ethics. They love their car, and they don't even read their car manual. So they're not going to read a manual on ethics. Ethics as a noun. But ethics as an adjective, ethical sales practices, ethical decision-making, how to get skills to write an email, if you can't tell if the recipient of the email is a man or a woman or what culture they come from if you're sending it along a global supply chain. Ethical conflict resolution, ethical relationships, and ethical capitalism. Ethics as an adjective, as a modifier, as an imperative, that tends to be interesting to people. So I don't have a manual on ethics to offer. I find there are very few recipients. But I do believe it's worthwhile talking about a real power to create waves when we talk about ethics as an adjective. In my view, ethics and capitalism have long been together. They've been together from the start. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Adam Smith, the acknowledged founder of capitalism, when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he was the chairman of the moral philosophy department at Glasgow University. The Wealth of Nations was not written by an economist. I know people have usurped it and they think it's about unbridled competition and about laissez-faire, freedom to pursue ends at anybody's expense. When Adam Smith talked about capitalism, he talked about trust, exchanges and trades to mutual advantage, about creating real progress in the world. Capitalism comes from the Latin word capitalis, literally using our head to get ahead, using our head to create real progress in the world. Trust, mutual advantage, and progress are ethical concepts, and they're built into capitalism, and in my view, they drive capitalism, and that is going to be true today more than ever. So, I took us all the way back to the day that capitalism was started and founded. Why is the old relevant today if I just said the world is the wild, wild web? is here's something that has never changed. Never changed. People want to win. They want to be number one. They want to be special. They want to be unique. They want to be recognized as such. And they want to be different, and they need to differentiate. That has been true since the beginning of time. But what's interesting is that in the industrial age, people differentiated themselves with what they did. And that's changing. The conditions of the world today make it increasingly hard to differentiate yourself by a better, faster, cheaper mousetrap. Back in the industrial age, there were great incentives. If you invented a new product, you typically had a 5 to 10 year head start. Haloid became Xerox in 5 years, and with one photocopier became a $500 million company in 5 years back then. If you looked at Forbes or Fortune, the winners that we celebrated in the economy were people who invented better mousetraps. They made better whats. But you see, even though innovating in what we did powered 20th century capitalism, those days are gone. Clay Christensen, the guru who writes about innovation, pretty much talked about the forces in the economy that are pushing everything towards lukewarm. Everything is becoming commoditized. McDonald's makes hot coffee, they get sued. All coffee in this country is now served lukewarm. The pressure towards lukewarm, towards commodification, and towards the middle is so powerful that when you look around at all the winners, you see that very few people, there are a few geniuses that can invent something that is so protected that it'll take them to the finish line. But most people today in business do not win with just what they do. They are winning with how they do it. Starbucks invented a lexicon, venti, latte, cappuccino. But every diner serves cappuccinos and lattes. But why is Starbucks so successful? Something about how they do business. Something about their approach, their strategy, their business model allows them to win. Hewlett-Packard invents a great computer. Michael Dell shows up and says, I could put it together with just-in-time inventory better than anybody else, and my business will be a better business because how I assemble a computer, not because of the computer itself. And then we look at Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines pays the same fuel costs. They fly the same airplanes as some of their rivals. But somehow they turn their planes around in 14 minutes, and their rivals turn their planes around in 28 minutes. Sometimes they come home and they arrive more on time, and they've been one of the most profitable companies in the last 20 years. They're not differentiating themselves with their planes, their product, but how they move these planes around and fly people from point to point. So if you want to avoid in life ending up lukewarm or room temperature, the time is to innovate, not just in what you do, but how you do it. Now, even that concept isn't new. Zero defects, Six Sigma, Kaizen, CRM, ERP, TQM, process control, customer lifecycle management, reengineering, supply chain management, safety, your business model, strategy. We've studied all these things. All of these things are how we do things. This is innovation in our processes, innovations in how we implement, as I said, how we put together a computer, for example. These are hows of process, of implementation. Jack Welch once said about GE, here's why our annual reports fully describe what GE does and what markets it's in. Because they can't copy how we do it. You can copy what we do, but not how we do it. And then a funny thing happened probably in the last 10 years. Everybody's answering the phone in 2 rings. Everybody's reducing quality defects to infinitesimal levels, and very few people die on the job or get injured on the job because we have figured out how to do these process and implementation hows. So if you can't out-productize and you can't out-process the competition, but you still want to win and be different and differentiated, where are you going to go to stand out, to be unique and be differentiated? If you can't do it with what, and you can't do it with how you make something, where are you going to go? You're going to find the one area that has great variation and variability. Because when there's great variation, there's opportunity for differentiation, right? Well, what is the one area left where there's great variation? Human conduct. Some people keep all their promises, some people keep half their promises. Some people can engender trust, some people do the opposite. Human conduct, the rich tapestry and spectrum of human beings, their motivations and how we act and what we say and what we do is so varied around this new, small, flat world It's so varied that there is opportunity for differentiation. Human conduct. Basically, in a world in which nothing stays hidden, people have to act as if they have nothing to hide. But before you can act as though you have nothing to hide, in fact, you have to have nothing to hide. There is an opportunity to literally outbehave your competitor, to be better at behaving. You can outbehave someone today. You might not be able to answer a phone faster than them. You might not be able to create an anti-tampering device and choose bottled water based on an anti-tampering device because everybody has that nailed pat. But you can outbehave someone. And interestingly, people are paying attention to this dynamic. What do you think the number one word searched on Webster's Worldwide Online Dictionary was last year? We had a tsunami. We had New Orleans. Right? We had a lot of big words that people wanted to understand, like what a tsunami really is. What do you think the number one word searched on Webster's was, nonetheless? Integrity. The one word that people tried to figure out, what does this word really mean in this world? It's integrity. And how many of you watch reality TV? What is reality TV all about? We are watching people behaving and how they treat each other. This person is sabotaging this person and getting voted off an island. This person is competing fairly or not and becoming the apprentice. Right? We are watching human conduct in reality TV. We are a reality TV surveillance society. We watch conduct because it's cheap and easy to do that. Anybody can click, anybody can Google, and we're naturally curious. We don't need to be experts at finding out information. Everybody is looking through the glass, through the fishbowl. LRN, we did a survey. 70% of consumers will not purchase from a company that they think has questionable ethics. And this is another survey that came out. MBAs reported that they would take on average a 14% pay cut to work at a company that they perceive to be more ethical. So ethics is starting to get quantified as an advantage. In the 21st century, your world, ethics is fast becoming a quantifiable asset. Breaches of ethics are causing irreparable harm. Second chances are fewer. Years ago, a quack doctor could get up and move to the next town and start over. But every one of us has a database that's Google searchable that we take with us wherever we go. Second chances are rare, and we set things in motion earlier than ever before. Now, I'm not here to talk about the irreparable harm caused by these scandals. It's been painful and tragic to watch icons in industry and in business lose their ethical footing. Companies implode because they had unethical cultures. We know about the pain and suffering and economic loss that's happened there. We know about the Pulitzer Prize winners who plagiarize. We know about the football coaches who lie on their resume, and I can go on and on. But I want to talk about something more subtle. I want to talk about ethical lapses that are so subtle that they are therefore more pernicious than the big stuff that we can easily and so obviously see. Let me illustrate. I talked about Google a few times. What do you think the number one word searched on Google was last year? Not Britney Spears, not the tsunami, not Brad Pitt, not Michael Jackson. Who knows what that word is? Have you been on Google recently? Well, let me give you guys a hint. We'll save that. Janet Jackson. Any other contenders? Any other contenders? So here's a hint for anybody who doesn't yet have an opinion. Who can remember who played in the Super Bowl in 2004? Just raise your hand. Who? Patriots? Who'd they play? Carolina. What was the score? 32-29. And the lead changed score 4 times. How come? Who watched the Super Bowl? So all of you watched the Super Bowl, and it was one of the greatest, closest game in the history of the Super Bowl, and we don't remember what happened, what the score was. Do you guys remember what happened in halftime? Wardrobe malfunction. So how come you over there remember a 1-second compliance failure? You remember a 1-second wardrobe malfunction, but you might not remember the game itself. Why is that? What is that? That's the subtlety here. You see, That wardrobe malfunction resulted in 500,000 emails to the FCC and the largest fine ever. A 1-second failure to comply. Let's make an analogy. How many of you in the last week or two received an email, and you opened up the email and you had one of the following reactions? This is not what we agreed to. This pisses me off. Why did you CC so-and-so or my boss? Are you trying to make me look bad? Anybody have one of those reactions recently? I'm offended. I'm slightly offended. I'm offended from a sexual or racial point of view. Any of those reactions? Have you forwarded this email to 3 or 5 or 10 more people? Have some of you called a friend or loved one and said, how's your day going, honey? Let me tell you about mine. Do you see how that one distracting email can pull your head right out of the game and interfere with winning, with the ability to produce? See, those who get their house right can keep their head in the game. The distracting power of ethical lapses can create so much friction, dissonance, and distraction that it gets in the way of productivity. It is hard to win, because if we don't keep our head in the game and focus on winning, we won't win. And the email example is but one of many ways in which ethical lapses can harm us in subtle ways or help us in good ways. So, if ethics, when it's there, can allow us to focus and achieve progress and be on a journey of significance which will lead to success, how do we get more ethics on a team, at a company, in an organization? How do we do it? How do we get more of these results and behaviors that we want? Many people think that the answer lies in let's get the right rules in there, the right penalties, let's stiffen the penalties, and let's be sure that everybody complies and plays by the rules. If we get the rules right and can motivate everybody through carrots and sticks, because B.F. Skinner once said that people love pleasure and they hate pain, so with enough carrots and sticks, we can get people to comply and follow the rules, we will get all the behaviors we want, and people can focus on winning. Now, I respect the fact that we are a rule of law society, that we put law and the rule of law above man, that we are governed by laws and a constitutional democracy and not man. But even though I respect the rule of law, I have less respect for the rules of law. They are proving to be problematic. You see, the ultimate purpose of law is to create certainty, stability, and predictability, because if your life is safe, certain, secure, and predictable, you could take that for granted and focus on your innovations, and you could pursue your aspirations. That's what law is there to do, to protect us, to give us enough security that we don't have to worry about our safety, we don't have to worry that our currency won't stand up, that our investments and intellectual property won't be protected. And the more certain security we have, the more we can go forward and try to achieve. So governments, well-intentioned, pass a lot of rules because they're trying to provide their citizens that type of certainty. But what's interesting, rules are starting to fail us. Rules are over and under inclusive. There's a rule that says you need to be 18 to vote. But we know that there are a bunch of 25-year-olds who have no sense of civic responsibility and duty who are showing up and voting. And we also know of some 15-year-olds who are precocious and are very informed and mature and are not voting. It's an easy rule to administer. You show up with a driver's license and you get to vote. But what if we had an election that said, can all mature and informed people come to the polls? It would be a better election, but incredibly hard to administer. But that's the gap between the rule of 18 and maturity. Rules have set good floors. Safety, child labor, environmental protection, building codes. We have codified good science for the benefit of society. There are some rules that provide great floors, great outer boundaries, and they work. But then there are areas where rules simply don't work, and the one area that rules work least good is with human conduct. How can you legislate a conflict of interest? How can you legislate maturity? Can all mature people come to the polls? You see, rules track vulnerabilities. Companies that I work with do not have policies or rules that say, don't forget to breathe. Employees aren't vulnerable to breathing. They show up and they keep breathing. And companies don't have rules that say, go home at night and see your family, because people tend to do that naturally. But they do have rules to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, because otherwise people might not come in at 8 o'clock in the morning. Wherever you see a rule, something bad happened prior. There's a vulnerability. But rules don't inspire. higher conduct. They don't inspire significance. It would be incoherent to legislate delight. I mandate you to delight the customer. I mandate you to exceed the customer's expectation. Almost an incoherent notion. There is nothing in a rule that can command and require to delight someone, to exceed a customer expectation, and to outbehave the competition. And finally, we have a weird, ambivalent relationship with rules. We watch Hollywood movies. You know how many Hollywood movies there have been that say, break all the rules? There's been 4 Hollywood movies that tell us to break all the rules. We watch Biography Channel, and all these leaders that we admire told us that they didn't play by the rules and got to the top. There's a best-selling business book that says, by Marcus Buckingham, that says, first break all the rules. And then there's a legislative process itself. We don't always respect how these rules were made and why they were made. So the bottom line, because of good intentions, we have a lot of rules, and because there are a lot of vulnerabilities, we have a lot of rules, but they're not serving us well. And there is a gap between rules and human conduct. And those who can close that gap, I believe, will win. You see, we carry in our hearts and our minds an ideal, a vision of an ideal state of certainty and predictability. But we never achieve that ideal state, and I call that gap the certainty gap. That gap never disappears, and in rough times, we still need to find ways to go forward, to pursue our lives, to win in business, to bring home a paycheck. So we have to fill that gap. Even though there's not enough predictability and certainty, we have to go forward. Even though there is a gap between our ideal state of certainty and where we are. What do we fill that gap with? Trust. Trust. You see, trust is what allows us to function in an absolute state of something less than certainty. So to understand the importance of trust and how we use trust to close that certainty gap to allow us to go forward and to achieve, indulge me. Let me take you on a trip. Not the type of spring break trip that you're used to or had recently. I'm going to take you on a different trip. And for me, TRIP is an acronym. The T in TRIP stands for trust. Aristotle talked about trust as being a virtue. We've just met. If I trust one of you, or all of you, who's got the virtue? Me for trusting you, or you for being trustworthy? Anybody have an answer? You for being trustworthy? Actually, Aristotle says, I've got the virtue for trusting you. Because when I trust you, even though I've never met you, I'm giving you the power to let me down or to do right by me. I'm the one who's vulnerable. The trusting person gives away the power to someone else to do the right thing or to let them down. And the more trust you give away, then you start to get a virtuous cycle, an upward spiral. Now we know that when I trust you and I've never met you, I'm the one taking a risk by giving you the power. But we know that in business and in life, no risk, no return. No risk, no reward. Interestingly, trust becomes the necessary condition for risk-taking. If trust is me taking a risk, then the more trust there is, the more risk people take. Studies have shown that if teams have a lot of trust in the room, they outperform teams that don't have trust. If you trust the person's vision for starting a wave, you'll stand up with them. If you don't trust, you're going to keep eating your hot dog and you won't get up. So trust leads and allows for risk. That's the R in TRIP. T for trust and R for risk. What does I stand for? Well, you can't innovate if you don't take risk. If you just stay status quo, you'll have stasis and decline. If you want to innovate, you need to take risk. All great innovations, someone probably took a risk. They risked capital, they risked their energy, they risked their opportunity costs. So if trust leads to risk, risk is what leads to innovation. And what happens if you innovate? You create progress. P stands for progress. Not profits, progress. Adam Smith's progress. And progress is only possible through innovation. And if you achieve enough process, then the P stands for perennial prosperity as well. The $64 billion question, it used to be 64 million, now it's 64 billion. The $64 billion question of our time is therefore, how do we get this trip going? Where does it start? What's the big bang? How do we get trust and trip going. We've already shown that it's not rules, because rules can't inspire that type of certainty and risk-taking. So if it's not with rules, what is it with? I call it E-trip, and E stands for ethics, because we tend to trust people that we think do the right thing, and we don't trust people that we think will take advantage of us. That's the bottom line. If you want trust, you need integrity and ethics. We trust people who get their house right, who are straight up with us, who are transparent, forthcoming, open. They share credit with us, they share opportunity with us, they collaborate, and they embrace and engage. You want trust, you need ethics. You want trust, you got to find people and companies who get their house right. So, basically, you are entering an era where the currency of your age is trust. Those who can engender and wield more trust will win. We have entered an era of values. You've all heard of the CEO of Boeing that got pushed out or fired or some version of that, right? What was the reason given publicly in a press release? Not that he didn't follow a rule, not that he didn't honor the code of conduct. He brought disrepute to Boeing. And then you have 200,000 Boeing employees who say, wow, what does repute versus disrepute look like? That's like maturity or immaturity in elections. The CEO of Citigroup traveled around the world and he apologized for some of Citigroup's conduct. What did he apologize for? Not for breaking the law, but for unfairly influencing the bond markets. So now 300,000 Citigroup employees have to understand what is fairness versus unfairness. We have entered an era of values, not rules, and values are hard, they're amorphous, they're nebulous, but nonetheless we have no choice but to close the certainty gap with values, and the winners are going to get good at fairness, at repute, at maturity, at judgment, etc., etc. How do companies get this right? How do they institutionalize? You join a company with 100,000 people. How does a company institutionalize TRIP? Well, let me remind you that companies are legal fictions. Most are incorporated in Delaware, and very few people go to Delaware. They're legal fictions, they're abstractions, but in reality they are communities, they are stadiums full of real people. These are people with strengths and weaknesses, good days and bad days, conflicts and other interests and aspirations in their lives. Companies, in reality, are communities. They are cultures of real people. Lou Gerstner once said about IBM, when I started as CEO of IBM, I thought that culture was part of the game, and then I learned that culture is the game, because that's what a company is. Successful companies are going to get their cultures right because they're going to understand that that is the fundamental driver. They're going to become cultures of how, not of rules. They're not going to create a lot of carrots and sticks and send them at people, asking them to comply. They are going to inspire conduct and hows through values and ethics. I talk about culture. When you go out there and you join a company, you're going to be joining 4 cultures. There are 4 choices for you. Anarchy and lawlessness is a culture. I assume most of you don't want to be in an anarchy state, but that's a culture. The second culture that I see from time to time is blind obedience. Do what we tell you, here's your paycheck. Those don't tend to win either. Most cultures are cultures that I call informed acquiescence. We will inform you as to the rules, and through carrots and sticks, we're going to ask you to comply. And when people comply, they exit themselves. The rule is here, they are here, and they, through motivation, they comply with something external to them. And then they look to their left and they see that this guy's not complying, and they go, why should I bother? And this person doesn't have the manual of all the rules, so he forgets about one rule. And these cultures start to unravel. There aren't enough carrots and sticks to go around. There aren't enough manuals with all these rules for every situation. The cultures that are starting to win are cultures that I call self-governing cultures. In a self-governing culture, people do the right thing and they get their house right, because not to do so is no longer a betrayal of the company. It's no longer a failure to acquiesce. It's a betrayal of oneself. And people do not like to not honor themselves or to have that type of cognitive dissonance. So if you can get people to share in ethics, in values, in beliefs, and in trust, they do the right thing, because in doing so they honor themselves. Companies who can get self-governing cultures where everybody is harnessing this power of how are the ones that win. And these are the companies that have the greatest sustainable, enduring asset. You know why? Because the one thing you can't copy is culture. How could you copy a culture? It's internal, it's stories, it's traditions, it's values passed one generation to the next. It's the spoken and unspoken. Culture is the single most powerful differentiating asset because it cannot be copied. So, who saw this movie? Show of hands. What do you guys think it was about? Anybody? Help me out here. What's the theme of this movie? Survival? Most people think it's about survival, and I think it is in many serious ways. Tom Hanks was alone on an island. And on an island, you don't need ethics, unless you think that trees deserve a certain level of treatment. On an island, you don't need ethics. You just try to survive. But what happened at the end of the movie? I take a lot of inspiration from this movie. At the end of this movie, Tom Hanks not only survived, he delivered the FedEx package. He kept the promise. And he wrote, "This package saved my life. It gave meaning and significance to my life." There are FedEx employees out there who think that their job is to deliver a certain amount of packages by the time their shift ends. But I believe that FedEx is a great company because most people, like Tom Hanks in this movie who work at FedEx, believe that they're in the business of keeping a promise, not just delivering a package or checking something off their task list. Companies that get it right are going to be full of people who understand that what they do is keep a promise. And they are going to also listen to Aristotle. You can tell that Aristotle is one of my favorite philosophers because Aristotle said that excellence is not a single act. It's a habit. You're not a promise keeper if you keep your last promise, but if you keep 500 in a row. And companies that get this right are going to institutionalize this muscle of making promise keeping a habit of excellence. I think of the story of two bricklayers. You walk up to two bricklayers and you ask them each what they're doing. One bricklayer says, "Can't you see? I'm laying brick." The other person says, "Can't you see? I'm building a cathedral." Same activity, different consciousness. I'm successfully doing my task. I'm achieving and pursuing significance. Great cultures are about promise keeping. So we began with the distinction between doing something and succeeding and doing something so as to succeed. And I believe that great cultures get this distinction right. They are full of people who aren't bricklaying but are building cathedrals, whatever that is. It could be a pharmaceutical company trying to cure disease around the world and make the world a healthier place. It could be a media company trying to entertain people and give them delight and happiness. There is one company, and I'm going to skip ahead. Johnson & Johnson, like Raytheon and other companies, I admire J&J. Johnson & Johnson does not have an ethics manual. They don't have a 500-page ethics code. They have a one-page credo. And if you read the credo, it's basically full of promises. Our first responsibility is to our patients, then to the doctors. It's a series of ethical promises. And what does the credo say on the bottom? If we live according to these principles, our shareholders should, not will, should receive a profit. They are doing these things and making a profit. They're not doing these things in order to make a profit. Why take care of a customer? Why take care of a patient? To take care of the patient. If should becomes will, then the only reason to take care of a patient is if it will generate profits. And the minute you see that taking care of the patients won't generate profits, you might stop. So, each of you is on a journey. Journeys of significance are a lot harder, more arduous, and they are longer than journeys of success. To help you, I came up with something when I had the privilege of teaching some undergraduates political theory. I call it the paradox of journeys. I was teaching some political theory, and it dawned on me. Who's getting A's? Maybe this will be relevant when you take your finals. Who's getting A's, who's getting B's, and who's getting C's? The B students got up to the first hump. They started with very little knowledge, and they got to the top, and they acquired basic knowledge. They mastered the terrain. They could regurgitate it. The exam made very few mistakes. They laid out the material. They commanded a basic understanding of the subject matter. And they got Bs. Who got Cs? Cs were two types of students. Some people just didn't show up. They mailed it in. They were clearly C students. But there were other C students who were A students that got confused. They innovated. They struggled. They said some smart things. They said some things that weren't in the study group. But they made some mistakes because in their wrestling, they got a little confused. The exam was a C. And why do I call this the paradox? Because when you're at a C, you're farther along in time than at a B. A C student is ahead of a B student on his or her way to an A. And an A is a power, an A is a mastery, an A is deep knowledge where you can't just take the exam, you could teach the class. And I believe that every journey that you're going to go on is going to follow this pattern. You're going to start and you're going to say, how do I harness my hows? How do I write that effective email? How do I resolve a conflict? How do I wrestle with a dilemma? And you're going to get some basic knowledge, maybe from an ethics manual. And then you're going to go for it. You're going to have the courage to leave the first hump and go towards an A, and some of you might get caught. I think of the movie Animal House when all the band was just marching against the wall, just kind of playing because they got caught in the valley, the deep, dark valley of confusion. But Thoreau said that out of darkness you see the heavenly lights, and I believe that if we keep struggling and wrestling, we will develop that power, and we will get up to an A, and we will master. And in the area of the journey of significance, this is what I believe we will master. We will master not only our whats, but our hows. We will get good at just not following rules, but being good at values and hows and principles. We're not just going to acquiesce to rules, we're going to self-govern. We're not just going to lay brick and do tasks. We're going to see what we do as a series of promises, and we're going to keep them. And we're going to go beyond the first hump of success and achieve significance. The key here is the courage to wrestle, to struggle, to go into that deep valley of C and come out of it with a true power. So wherever you are in your journey as a student, as an executive, as a leader, I urge you, don't settle for being a bricklayer. Unleash your power of how. Close the certainty gap between you and anybody else with trust, and pursue significance. And I take it as an article of faith, even though the world has made it more likely than ever before that when you pursue success, you will pursue significance, you will achieve success. And finally, I look at you, Mike, and I think of your legacy. And I have an ironic legacy for you. I think that if all this works, and we all have the courage to get to the second hump, the center for business ethics will no longer be the center of discussion today. It will go back to the margins because the power of how will live in each one of us, and we will take it wherever we go. Thank you for having me and for listening.
Dov will take some questions now, and Jamie on this side and Tom on that side will bring you a microphone so you can be heard, if we can see you. So, who would like to ask the first question?
cheating culture that we have, particularly in the U.S. these days. And one of them is to be a chump. To be a chump, which basically means, okay, so everybody else is cutting corners and getting ahead, and you're just there, leaving money on the table, leaving the grades, in the book or whatever it takes. And so how does that fit? And I've got some ideas, but I'd like to hear from you. How does that fit with the slump there, with the C? actually wind up struggling because they're trying to buck a culture that, in many ways, seems so daunting and so impossible to do anything about.
That's a great question, and that's why this is a paradox, because it's not comfortable being in the C position, even though at some level you're farther along and closer to an A. One of the points I was really trying to make today is that we don't need to prove that sociopaths and bad apples aren't still going to try to cut corners and get ahead. There still are a lot of cheaters. That's the path we got on. We stopped listening to Adam Smith a long time ago. All we need to prove is that increasingly nice people can finish first, good people can finish first, and ethical people can. We don't need to disprove that other people won't continue to cut corners. And that's why the focus on culture is so important. In my business, I don't go to companies and say, let's find your bad apples. Let's find your sociopaths and throw them out. I say, let's work on the culture. And if the culture celebrates the right things, it will eject the barrel will eject the bad apples. What matters is who survives and thrives in a culture. Now, if you go back to, if you indulge me in one religious reference, the first emotion in the Bible was Adam and Eve averted their eyes so as not to be ashamed. Shame is a very socializing cultural emotion. Back in California, if you walk into a restaurant and you're a smoker, a non-smoker can give you a dirty look and they have shamed you and you've got to leave. There are other, maybe in Paris, it's the opposite. What cultures have to get right is what is socially acceptable here? What is stigmatized? What is shameful? Because people want to get invited to poker parties, they want to get invited to company socials, etc. Over time, when more people get on this journey of significance, they're going to make it uncomfortable for the cheaters. And it's not going to, if you want a program to do this, it takes 6 months and it'll fail. If you want to focus on a corporate culture, it'll take 10 years. 10 years at minimum. But let me make one last analogy and then I'll take another question. 20 years ago or so, people said quality is like ethics. It's amorphous. I know good quality when I see it. It's an aesthetic. I can't measure quality. So we'll put people at the end of the assembly line and they'll find defective products and throw them away. Then the Japanese showed up and they bought Pebble Beach and a lot of our real estate, and we said, what are they doing in business that we can't do? They're measuring quality. They're designing it into everything. And suddenly we declared quality job one. We took this immeasurable, amorphous thing, and we are now quantifying quality defects to infinitesimal Six Sigma levels. Well, ethics is today's job one. It's still amorphous. People can still debate it, but we did it with quality. We did it with safety, and I believe we're going to do it now with corporate culture and cultures of ethics. But it'll take 10 years or longer.
Okay, looking for a student question. There's one. Oh, could you tell us who you are and what your major is?
My name is James Collins. I'm a marketing major and international studies minor. I was wondering, from being the captain of your crew team, what lessons that provided you now, and also when along your path you decided to take what you learned and go the entrepreneurial route.
Sure. So you should know that when I got to Oxford, I had not rowed crew before. And I was probably the worst rower from a skill standpoint in the boat. And again, captaining that boat had nothing to do with my erg score or how well I rowed. There was probably more to do with leadership in that way. But the one thing that I love about crew is that when 8 blades go in the water, if they go in at slightly different times, they each act on as a brake. But when 8 blades come into the water at the same time and thrust, the boat will hydroplane and sing. And there's nothing like getting people to really work together by being really transparent. This is what we're trying to do through trust, etc. So I think crew is a powerful metaphor that those blades could be brakes if they each come into the water at a different time, or if they come into the water at the same time. It's pretty much 8 people doing the same thing in synchronicity in that way. The other part of your question is, when did I decide to get into this business? Well, I just turned 41, and we like to look back and romanticize our past. I don't have one reason. I don't know what demons I was trying to slay or what dragons were in my head. So it's probably a bunch of things that led me on this path. It's never one thing. I don't think we can essentialize these life choices. It came down to to one thing. But one thing I am sure of is I'm passionate about this subject. When I studied it, I was passionate about it. I feel blessed that I can make a living in an area of passion. And of all the things that Mike said that I'm most proudest of is that I'm a BE guy. I'm before Enron. That I was out there trying to sell vaccines and vitamins to people because I had convictions around it, even though they told me we'll never be sick. There won't be scandals. So the lesson to me is authenticity. Just live a legitimate, authentic life. Pursue something that's really passionate. And things will take care of themselves. You'll adapt and you'll move around and you'll find ways to achieve what you're trying to achieve, but do something that's really meaningful or passionate in that way. But I always cared about human interaction and felt that there's variation and therefore opportunity to do better. Thanks for the question.
Any question from the over crowd? They're still thinking. Anybody else? I see one up in the top left. Jamie's going, Tom.
It's Tim Faubert, and I'm an economics and finance major. And I've got a question on the corporate scene, really. If a lot of companies are really outsourcing everything these days to kind of save money, I know some corporation with their name doesn't matter, that their ethics and environment is outsourced to a phone line. I was wondering, by not having physical environment in the company, that you're not really getting that inspiration by human interaction. Do you think that's really affecting the workplace law? Do you think they're shortchanging their ethics?
You said that what's being outsourced in their ethics? I didn't hear.
Really, not just farming. If you have a mental decision, you're stuck on something you're supposed to call the phone line and kind of get advice from someone that really doesn't know your really line of business or anything like that.
Sure. So phrased that way, I think that company is not in great shape. Being blunt, I don't think you can outsource ethics. I think the fish rots from the head. So if you want ethics, you've got to get it right at the top. The board, the leadership has to set the right tone. But you see, culture is something that we're starting to do. Instead of it organically just happening, people are sitting in a room and saying, let's reward and celebrate the right things. Let's punish the right things. Let's talk about the right things. Let's educate on the right things. We can do culture and not just let it happen. Now, you mentioned something about that phone line. See, there are a lot of CEOs who like plausible deniability. They say, just like every city has some crime, every culture has some bad actors. Don't hold me responsible for these bad actions as long as I have a phone line that people can call, or as long as I put posters on the wall with our code of conduct, etc. What these companies are doing is they are relying on programs, on check-the-box programs, as proxies and surrogates for their culture. Right? Now, when individuals come before the judicial system, we judge them. Malice aforethought, depravity of heart, was this intentional or negligent? We judge the character of individuals day in, day out, and life or death decisions depend on that. When it comes to companies, we've had a due diligence standard. Have they taken due diligence? There's room for plausible deniability. But that's what's changing, because finally, because of this transparent society that we're in, we can impute a character, a culture to a company. So, for example, a company says, we have this hotline that you're talking about. We're terrific. We offer a hotline. What if someone shows up and interviews 1,000 employees and 92% of them say they're too scared to call it, or there's a culture of distrust? So now I have direct evidence that there's a culture of fear or a culture of distrust, and no one's picking up the phone. Why should I give you credit for the hotline if I can directly judge your character? So in this new era that we are transparently and directly having a relationship with culture, companies are going to start figuring it out that they have to get their culture right and not just put programs in place. So those are the ones I would watch for. Who is directly doing culture in the same way they were doing quality and doing safety? Those are the companies I would take a job with. The ones who are just checking boxes, I would stay away from.
An older person, not in the factory, but much younger than I. Who's got the mic? Okay, Jamie's got it. I understand that some of you have to leave, but don't all of you.
Thank you very much, by the way.
Because of the class. We're checking to make sure you're going to class.
Appreciate your words today. Why don't I just you talked about the importance of measurement of quality in terms of the development of quality initiatives. And I was wondering if you could speak about measuring ethical programs and what you've seen in that area. And do you see a vision perhaps where there's going to be some kind of standardized ethical performance measure?
So the question was, if we were measuring quality and we're measuring safety, injuries on the job, will we start to measure ethics? The answer is yes and no. Right? If there's a gap between and so as at some level, you do the right thing because virtue is its own reward. The problem with full-on measurements is the minute you don't like the measure, oh, we're spending this much on ethics, but no one has gone to jail in the last 5 years, let's spend less on ethics. So ethics is not an area where you want to do too much cost-benefit analysis. When J&J pulled Tylenol off the shelves, they didn't sit there and say, if we keep it on the shelves, how many people will die? If we take it off, how many lawsuits will we have? It was just the right thing to do, and they decided that if they do that, things will take care of themselves. So there's one piece of ethics you can't measure. You do it because it's the right thing to do, and as an article of faith, things turn out. And now there's evidence. That being the case, there are negative and positive ways to measure. Right? A lot of bad things used to happen here. Are less than those things happening? Right? So there are ways to measure what's not happening that used to happen once you set a baseline. That's on the negative side. There are great ways to measure on the positive side. You're seeing real sophisticated surveys. I mean, Raytheon does yearly ethics surveys where they really they triangulate at this issue of how are people feeling on the job? Can they challenge their boss? If their boss asks them to do something that they think is not right, what kind of fear do they have of retaliation, etc.? You can start to get at whether there are leading indicators of healthy cultures. So there are a lot of leading indicators that say this is a healthy place because in healthy places people do this and they feel this way and they say these things in that way. Mergers and acquisitions. Right? One company wants to sell itself to another company. They sit in a room and they go, who are the likely buyers? Well, who would we want to do business with? We trust these guys. So interestingly, you're starting to see that people are even choosing who to sell to or merge with based on ethical considerations. Would we want to be in business with these people? The companies that don't make that list, they might never know it. Where are investors putting their dollars? Where are employees taking jobs? So we are going to start to come at this like quality and like safety and find more measures. It's too early to decide what the best measures are, but I'm convinced that we're going to develop them. And we're going to develop guideposts and signposts for doing it right.
I'm going to take one more question, and first I'll look to students if they would like to ask one. Yes, Rick.
My name is Gala, and I'm a fellow from New Horizons Scholarship. I'm an international student, I'm from Russia. And my question is, I believe that ethics is one of the excellent, brilliant things in the world. And it seems to me that you think that all companies now show their faces to corporate culture and ethics. But as Spinoza said that all excellent things are as difficult as they were, don't you think that now it's in a lot of companies, it's like a fake culture. It's like one of the standards of business. Like to be as people want to see us, but not as we are in reality.
So, profound question. First, you should know that at LRN.
Why don't you just tell the audience your understanding, because the microphone is not picking up everything.
So if I had to net your question out, how real is this, right? And back to your house. Do you write a resume that reflects who you are, or do you write a resume that reflects who you think you want your employer, who your employer thinks you should be? And in that gap. So I think your question is really about, is this just becoming another corporate program, another business process because it's fashionable? Or how real is it, how ingrained, and will it really be the differentiator for most companies?
Yes.
Is that fair? Okay. I should start by saying that at LRN, all our conference rooms are named after philosophers. And Spinoza is one of the conference rooms right near my office. I think, Mike, you've seen it. And that exact quote is on there. And if you give me your email, I'll have a picture taken and then I'll email it to you with the plaque with your quote. So it's a nice connection. Look, I think that right now some people are they're early adopters. They're a fast-following majority. You've studied this in marketing. Slow-following majority, and there are laggards who will never get it. There are some people who really understand that if they take this seriously, I talked about Raytheon and J&J and other companies, this is the way to do it. Others are going to try to do a minimum or fake it. But I think that the way the world is changing, it's going to get sorted out. I'm optimistic, but I think we have many years to go. Internationally, this is becoming a big problem. And we used to do business in very homogeneous environments. But technology has put a lot of heterogeneity into the system. There are a lot of people who've never broken bread, who don't speak the same language and don't share the same values, thrust together on corporate email and supply chain. And I'm seeing more explosive miscommunication and more differences of opinion and attitude because technology has put the global workforce together faster than we have developed frameworks for understanding each other. And the companies that get that right, that really understand how to take different people, diverse people, and create a powerful global culture that has trust are going to win. And the ones that just thrust people together and don't figure out how to help people who've never met each other, who don't speak the same language, et cetera, work together are going to have a tough time in what Tom Friedman recently called the flat horizontal world in that way. Your question is not answered. I think we should meet in 10 years and kind of see. But it's been done in other areas of business. I think it will be done in ethics.
Let's give Dov a great round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think that may be the biggest round of applause we've had for one of our Raytheon speakers, so congratulations.